The Washington State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council released its quarterly state revenue forecast. The state's received some good news. Tell us about that.
Right. So over the next 4 years, we're looking at about a $1.3 billion increase in state revenues. That's a whole heck of a lot of money. With about $647 million coming in the first two-year revenue forecast, and about $671 million in addition on top of that. So $1.3 million, we're flush with cash.
With all this new tax revenue coming in, is there still discussion in the legislature about tax increases?
Well, I wish I could tell you that there wasn't, but there certainly is. Just last week there was a capital gains tax came out of the House Finance Committee and has been included in the supplemental budget proposal that we're going to be considering here early next week. So those proposals are still certainly there. And Secretary of State John Kerry was in town just the other day assisting the governor in pushing for a carbon tax. So those tax proposals are still in play, even though the state is so flush with cash in the 4-year outlook. Now, I always look at any tax increase skeptically, especially in the face of such a positive cash flow. But as we move into this coming budget talks, we need to keep that in mind, and the fact that folks out there in our communities outside of Seattle aren't seeing this kind of increases. And so I really believe that the tax increases that we're looking at right now that are being proposed are just absolutely unsustainable. And when people's personal incomes are not growing at the same rate as the spending proposals here in Olympia, we have to look at that very skeptically and realize the fact that folks out there just can't afford it.
You had good momentum with House passage of House Bill 2287. That's your diversion center measure to treat opioid drug addiction. However, that bill has seemed to run into a little trouble over in the Senate. Could you explain?
Right. So, yeah, House Bill 2287 left the House of Representatives unanimously without a single dissenting vote. So I was really happy to get that vote count out of the House. But when it got over into the Senate, there's been some issues with it coming up. And just as a reminder, what this bill does is it keys off the use of embedded social workers with our law enforcement officers now, and by creating a short-term housing facility in Snohomish County as a pilot with an existing 44-bed facility that we have there on the county campus. And it's going to serve as a service center, literally a service delivery center for those folks as they're waiting to get their beds in long-term treatment plans. And what's happening over in the Senate is the Senate chair of that committee has kind of gotten in the way. Being from Pierce County, there's some issues going on between the two jurisdictions, and so I'm real concerned with that. And unfortunately, it doesn't appear that that bill is going to move. However, the good news is that there's funding in both proposals in the House and the Senate budgets to fund that diversion pilot. And I was successful in the House Appropriations Committee just this past week. I had a member introduce an amendment to the budget that included $800,000 in funding for the pilot project, and we also included the metrics and reporting mechanism that are so important to this bill. So we're going to continue to push this forward. The amount levels within both the House and the Senate are both set at $800,000, but there's still a little bit of a policy difference between the two. So we're going to be working hard to get those matched up, and we're going to drive that policy home and get that reporting back from Snohomish County to demonstrate that this model is the way to go.
You voted for a bill that would prohibit these Atlantic salmon pens in our state's waters, and that bill came about after a failure last summer of those pens in Samish Bay up near Bellingham. But you also have now voiced some real concerns about that bill. Can you tell us about that?
So this issue of Atlantic salmon net pens has stirred up a great deal of emotion up in the 10th Legislative District where I'm from, and the rest of the Puget Sound districts as well. I have never received as much communication from constituents on any one issue than this net pen issue. So it's definitely become a very emotional matter, and that's what really drove me to the vote that I took. I voted to, over time, eliminate the use of Atlantic salmon net pens. Now, the concern that I have with doing that is, first of all, I would have much rather preferred it to be a study. I'm not convinced that we have the data necessary to really demonstrate all of the dangers that are being perceived there. I know that kind of goes against a lot of the emails that I've received, but the bigger concern for me is the loss of jobs up in the North Puget Sound region. About 180 families are at risk of losing their employment and losing the food off their table and ability to pay their bills, and that's my bigger concern. I want to be able to make sure that those folks are taken care of. So it came down to a pretty emotional vote for me when we were doing this, because I had those families' interest in mind as I took that vote. But my vote demonstrates that I'm listening to my constituents, and the fact that I had so much communication from constituents on that matter. That this is a complicated matter, and we need to make sure that when we're making decisions down here in Olympia, that we're taking all of the information into consideration. And I'm not convinced that we had all of the information, so I'm going to be pushing for some of that as we move forward.
March 8th is the scheduled final day of the 60-day session. Is it too late for citizens to get involved?
Oh, no, not at all. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be headed back to the floor, voting on these bills, voting on the 3 budgets, and folks can still be involved and voice their concerns and wishes and desires for what's going on in the budgets and the Senate bills that we're now hearing over here in the House. You can do so by emailing me and my assistant Kendra, and we'll get back to you on that, or you can call our office at the phone number listed there on the screen, or call the legislative hotline. So there's a multitude of ways to get in contact with your legislator, and I sure hope that folks back home do that with me.